What is up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Today is finally the version 2 video of the Toliss versus FlightFactor. A little over 2.5 years ago, I made this comparison when these aircraft were brand new to the X-Plane community. Received a lot of heat for it, received a lot of praise for it, got a lot of views, got a lot of you guys involved in the channel itself, so for that I thank you. But over the course of the past couple years, both these aircraft have gone under numerous changes, and one of them, in my opinion, has aged like fine wine, while the other, not so much. But we're going to leave no stone unturned. We're going to be critical. We're going to be complimentary. We're going to get to the bottom of this debate. The FlightFactor A320 versus the Toliss A319. I can't wait to get started. I hope you are ready. Let's get after it. Alright guys, so as you saw some of the modeling there on the external modeling and some of the interior, both aircraft have a very good model, 3D model in my opinion. Now, I can't sit here with a straight face and tell you that they are exactly equal. I think it is pretty easy to see that the FlightFactor does have a little bit more detail when it comes to some of the finite details, such as hoist points on wings, some of the detailing around the engine, nacelles, wing roots, and of course the interior cabin. Now, with that being said, it is not without cost or impact to you on your CPU for those fine details. So in that aspect, the Toliss does indeed supersede the FlightFactor in terms of performance on any system. Now, the FlightFactor has been updated recently to get better performance, but it is still less of that of the Toliss A319. Now, one other thing here before we start getting into the guts and the absolute nitty-gritty of how these airplanes fly, let's look at some of the other options that come with the Toliss aircraft. You get a set of engines to choose from. This now is the Iae engine that comes with the Toliss aircraft, so you can toggle between CFM and Iae V2500s. You can also toggle between sharklets, you can toggle between a SATCOM antenna, and all of these toggleable options aren't just aesthetic options. They are actually coded into the aircraft itself, and the performance of each option is taken into account, so you are indeed almost switching variants of A319 that you are choosing to fly. You're not just changing the visuals, you are changing the guts of the aircraft itself. So what I really like about this is that it gives the user the ability to customize his aircraft exactly how he wants with just a click of a switch or a click of a button, and actually be able to customize the airplane that he's flying. The FlightFactor 320, while it does have a little bit superior texturing, it is a what you see is what you get type airplane. So you cannot change the motors on it, you cannot add sharklets to it, you cannot add a SATCOM antenna from the default stock airplane. Now, you can use mods, and we're going to talk about mods here in a second, but those mods that you can put on the FlightFactor are just aesthetic mods, and they don't do anything as far as performance-wise to the airplanes. So for customization, I definitely give the win to Toliss in this column. Alright, so now we're back in the FlightFactor 320, and how we're going to go about this video is I'm going to do the same flight with both aircraft, and I'll put up side-by-side image and video of the aircraft when applicable, but we're just going to basically take off here from Seattle on 16 Center, and we're going to do a series of air work or maneuvers. We're going to get into alternate law and direct law. We're going to see just how far these airplanes are modeled system-wise, because I know for some of you, that is the most important thing, is the system depth that you're actually purchasing. Alright, so now that we're in the cockpit, let's go ahead and just walk through a normal aircraft wake up. What we're going to do here is we're going to attach ground power via the EFB here on the FlightFactor EFB, and we'll go through our regular warm-up and power-up mode for the Airbus. So we get into the cockpit, we're going to come up to the overhead here, we're going to establish electrical power, get our batteries online. And we'll go ahead and establish electrical AC power to the aircraft. You can see the screens go into a self-test mode. Nicely simulated here. The ISIS is also going into its initialization. While that continues to warm up, let's go ahead and continue the rest of our overhead flow setup here. We're going to come up the left-hand side. We'll go ahead and turn the crew oxygen on. Ground control, we'll go ahead and turn that on. Begin the alignment of the ADIRs. Take note of the ADIRs panel here, as there is a different one in the A319 aircraft. We'll go ahead and set our strobes to auto. Nav to position 1. Seatbelts off. No smoking off. Arm the emergency exterior lights. We're not going to be receiving any fuel, so we can go ahead and just simulate that the fueling has been completed. Get our fuel pumps on. Go ahead and do a fire test. And up the right hand side here, we'll go ahead and make sure our cargo heat is as required. Alright, now let's go ahead and load into the A319. We'll go ahead and do the same procedure here for our electrical power up. While I'm going through and setting up the aircraft here, now establishing ground power via the Toliss ISCS menu instead of the EFB, I just wanted to give a quick note about mods. Both the Toliss A319 and the FlightFactor A320 in this video, the audio is provided via BSS Sound Pack. Now, Blue Sky Star Simulation or Blue Star Sky, whatever it is, I go by BSS. They have sound packs for both aircraft. I just didn't want to do a reinstall of both airplanes to get the default sounds back for you. However, the sounds on both airplanes are comparable, but in my opinion, slightly lacking. So for that reason, I run the BSS sound pack. It is the one add-on that I say is probably going to be your best payware add-on, whichever aircraft you decide to go with, whether it be the FlightFactor or the Toliss. I do recommend the BSS sound pack. Now, as you can see here, we're going through our overhead flow, going through the same motions here, ground control on. Now we can see the ADIRS panel over here on the 319 is that of an older model. Unfortunately, the functionality of the additional switches here are not modeled on this particular airplane. However, this system does the same exact thing as the ADIRS in the FlightFactor aircraft. It's just displayed a little bit different, and there's actually a little bit more functionality in the newer version. So as we're looking at the overhead here, and I'm going to do a side-by-side comparison of the cockpits here in just a second, but man, you can really see the difference from the first time I made this video when Toliss just released their 319. The texturing and just the modeling of the cockpit has made leaps and bounds to what it was initially when it first came out. So good job on Toliss for getting that nice and cleaned up. Alright, so as we take a look here at both cockpits side by side during the same time of day and the same sim with the same lighting conditions, you could see that they both are extremely well done. I can point out just a few little irregularities there. If you look at the Toliss ND, you see how all the lines are red as opposed to how the FlightFactor has the white lines and just the map not avail in red. That's actually more accurate representative of the real thing. But as far as the cockpits themselves, I think they are both extremely well done, and it's just going to be personal preference at that point when you're looking at just the cockpit modeling itself and comparing them side by side. Alright, so this is kind of a unique sequence here. I wasn't sure if I was going to include this in the video or not, but at this point I think we all know how to properly load the MCDU for the Airbus aircraft, and this video is not a tutorial by any means, but I just kind of wanted to do a side-by-side loading here of the box, kind of the same exact flight plan that I'm importing, basically a departure and an arrival, and loading the secondary. And you could see there's some differences between the FlightFactor and the Toliss, and this is such a hard topic to really discuss and which one's right versus which one's wrong, because Airbus has gone through numerous changes throughout the years, and there's different companies that run different software loads, different FMS loads, so there can be discrepancies between boxes even in the real world. So I don't want to say one is more realistic than the other. However, I will say that the FlightFactor has a few minor details that are more representative of what I currently fly as far as the initialization, align on ref. However, the Toliss MCDU definitely has more functionality with key systems pages, such as the fix info page, a working rad nav page, and also the ability to store and create custom waypoints. So in terms of functionality, the Toliss MCDU is definitely more advanced than the FlightFactor at this point in time. Alright, so I thought this was an interesting side-by-side comparison here. I went ahead and synced up the power on switch of the APU start cycle for both aircraft at the same time. You'll notice that the FlightFactor 320 APU will start up much faster than the Toliss 319. Now, there are multiple APU options available for the Airbus series of aircraft, so it's I don't want to speculate and see which one is which, but you can kind of see the differences in the spool-up dynamics of each APU, both modeled pretty well by the FlightFactor and the Toliss. Some little details you'll watch here as I pull up the Toliss APU start screen is the EGT, max EGT needle. You'll see that starts to move on the FlightFactor, whereas the Toliss is basically just has that red line to keep out. Now, that could be from an older software load as well. So again, it's harder for me to speculate and say one is correct and one is incorrect, whereas I can only relate to what I see mostly on the line out there flying in the real world. And what's more representative of my APU startup sequence is what I see there in the FlightFactor 320. But again, extremely minute details. You could see the ITT rollback there for the Toliss APU as well. So they're both extremely well done in my opinion, and I have no qualms either way. All right, so let's go ahead and go full screen here on the Toliss. I'm going to go ahead and cycle off the APU. A little courtesy here to the sounds here from BSS. As I spool up the bleed, you'll hear the pack spin up here. Nice little detail by that add-on sound pack. Again, that's why I recommend that sound pack for this aircraft. I'm not saying that you absolutely need one. I think the default sounds are a lot better than they were, again, from the original release of this aircraft. But the BSS pack, in my opinion, just gives it that little extra exclamation point to make it pop a little bit more. Alright, so here in this side-by-side engine startup here, we're using the sounds you're hearing are from the FlightFactor CFM pack now. But regardless, we're starting the same motor, CFM motors. Keep in mind that the 319 does have a slightly different motor than the 320. It's actually the same motor, however, it's been derated a little bit more, so the parameters are a little bit different for the 319. So I'm not looking for replication here, I'm just looking for the mechanics of engine start. I'm looking at that EGT, I'm looking at the needles move, just trying to see how they're represented here between the two aircraft. So as the engines come to life here, I'll notice that the CFM on the 319 got started at about 53 seconds when we got the avail indication, and it took about 43 seconds or so for the avail light to come on the FlightFactor. Unfortunately, I started the FlightFactor with the parking brake off. That's why that PTU started going off. And then, of course, FlightFactor being FlightFactor, the speed brake extends to half there on start, so why it got a little bit offset. But overall, both good engine starts. I don't see any glaring issues with either one. And because I accidentally left that parking brake off on the FlightFactor, I wanted to see the modeling or the detail here of the hydraulic system with the Toliss to see if it represented the real aircraft. And you can see here it does. As I release the parking brake from the Toliss with the engine master split, the PTU activates and pressurizes the number 2 system, just like the FlightFactor was doing there on that engine start. Alright, so just before we get underway here with our flight tests, I wanted to show you guys the options to swap engines in the Toliss. And I said before that you're actually changing the internals of the aircraft, and this is going to demonstrate that here. I'm going to toggle between the IAE and the CFM56, and you'll notice the different idle parameters, the different fuel flow parameters, and of course the EPR versus the N1 gauge there for power setting and setting your thrust in the airplane. So again, this is just to reinforce that when you are making these changes with the Toliss, it actually does affect the aircraft and the way it handles and the way that it performs. Alright, so as we watch a synced up takeoff roll here, done in identical conditions at the same time, I wanted to just make note that you're going to be listening to sounds from the 319 sound pack, just because I didn't want to overlay two sounds at the same time. But you'll see here during the takeoff roll, aircraft both accelerate well. I've got the trend needles, I've got all the proper indications on the PFD. The SRS command is already moving up, trending at that 10-degree mark. Both aircraft come off the ground. I will say that the FlightFactor is extremely pitch sensitive in the rotation phase there. I don't know if the how the blend mode is calculated for FlightFactor, but in my opinion, the Toliss feels much more realistic in terms of rotation characteristics when compared to the real aircraft. I'm using the exact same settings on my side stick. I'm using the Thrustmaster TCA Airbus side stick for this video and thrust levers, and I've also kept the curves and saturations completely off as recommended per both developers. So that'll come into play here a little bit further on as we get into this flight test. Now, as you noticed in the Toliss 319, I am using a Iae Engine mod. This is one of those free mods that are out there for the community. You can put them on. I think the Iae engines that Toliss has come out with originally have made substantial improvements, and by no means do you need a mod, except I'm an Iae V2500 junkie myself. I only fly the Iae engines when I can during the sim, and I just love the way they sound, and I like looking at my EPR gauges, and that's just a personal preference of mine. So that's why you see the Iae engines there on the Toliss bird. But I am running the Iae internals as well, so you can see that it does indeed have the Iae modeled, where we have a little bit slightly different upper ECAM display there with our engine instruments. All right, so as the departure is continuing on here, you're going to see here we're just going to get ourselves on a heading, and we're going to conduct some flight tests. Now, the flight tests that we're going to conduct are not for training purposes by any means. I'm not trying to do any PTS standards. I just want to show you guys the fly-by-wire modeling of both aircraft and how they handle. Again, keeping in mind I'm using the exact same joystick and settings for both airplanes, and I'm just trying to see how they handle. Now, without doing a video for comparison purposes, if you're using the TCA side stick, I personally would recommend some type of curvature and saturation for the FlightFactor. Throughout the course of this flight test, the FlightFactor was extremely pitch sensitive when used with conjunction of the TCA Airbus side stick. So just keep that in mind for you guys at home. Alright, so as we get the airplane configured here, I'm going to turn off all automation. I will leave the auto thrust on, and I'm going to activate the flight path vector, otherwise known as the bird. Alright, so as we get the aircraft established in a bank here, I want you to rethink what you commonly know as bank or roll in the Airbus. When you input a lateral command on the side stick, you are commanding a roll rate. Once you release that side stick, you are now commanding a roll rate of 0. Now, the Airbus fly-by-wire system has kind of a pseudo bank angle hold up to 33 degrees angle of bank. So if I input a roll command from 0 all the way to 33 degrees and release the side stick, the Airbus should maintain 0 roll rate at that position that was left at. Now, if I go past 33 degrees angle of bank, as you see here just in the FlightFactor and the Toliss, once you release that side stick past 33 degrees angle of bank and command 0 roll rate, the fly-by-wire law will allow the aircraft to right itself to 33 degrees and then maintain 33 degrees of bank. Now, this is also the same for pitch, except pitch I want you to think of load factor demand. Whenever you pull aft on the side stick, you are creating a demand for positive G. When you release the side stick to 0, you are now asking to maintain 1G. So the pitch is also modeled in both aircraft very well in terms of fly-by-wire. Alright, for this next demonstration, we are going to use the slow speed protections, and we want to see how each aircraft have modeled the slow speed protections and stabilities. So both aircraft are approximately 5,000 feet with the autopilot engaged. I did forget to turn the flight director back on the FlightFactor. That's why you don't see the flight director bars there. But for this demonstration, that is not going to matter. So the auto thrust is off in the idle position and the aircraft is asked to maintain 5,000 feet. As the speed slows into the VLS part of the speed tape there, you'll notice that nothing really changes, which is normal. What we are expecting to happen as we slow into V alpha prot, the autopilot should disconnect, and that will be the first sign of a stall, and recovery will then ensue. During the recovery process, I will improperly do an aggressive pitch up to try to trigger another protection, alpha floor. You'll see here both autopilots disconnect, attempted stall recovery, over aggressive pitch up, triggering alpha floor in the FlightFactor, and now attempting that in the Toliss. Alpha floor has been triggered, goes into Toga lock, move the thrust levers. So both systems are modeled pretty well. There was a little weird pitch down there in the FlightFactor. I don't know if you caught that just prior to autopilot disconnect. That's typically not seen in the real airplane, or in the simulator I should say, is, you know, hopefully you're not really stalling the airplane in real life, but in the sim it doesn't seem to do that little twitch moment. Alright, so now we're going to put the aircraft into alternate law. And while I understand 99.9% of simmers probably will never do this in their home simulator, I still want to find out which aircraft really models the underlying systems, the in-depth, the depth of systems, what makes something a study-level airplane, and this is what, in my opinion, would make an Airbus a study-level aircraft, is the implementation and the modeling of alternate and subsystems. Now, right away here, I can see a major glaring error in the FlightFactor in alternate law. Take a look at the speed scale. I have no indications of VLS or V alpha max. V alpha protection, or the yellow and black tiger tail, should be missing as you are in alternate law, and those protections are no longer applicable. However, VLS, the single amber line, and V alpha max, the alternating red and black, must be indicated on your PFD. As you can tell here, the FlightFactor is actually stalled. We are in a stalled condition, and I know we're not critiquing sounds, but there were no audible callouts for stall in the FlightFactor aircraft. Now, I don't know if that's a BSS thing or not, but I just wanted to note that. The stall that you hear, that is from the Toliss BSS sound pack and the oral warnings coming from the Toliss. Now, I will commence recovery here, a departure stall recovery, same as before. Go ahead and lower the AOA and then recover the aircraft flight path. Now, this is crucial to stall recovery, is that VLS is what we actually target during a stall recovery, and when we train for a recovery technique, is you want to lower the AOA and minimize your G loading until the aircraft's airspeed is above VLS. Without VLS indicating on your PFD, you are essentially operating in the blind. So a critical oversight, as my buddy at NASA would call it, not having that indicated on the PFD in alternate law. Now we're in alternate law with the gear down, which triggers direct law. Direct law is indicated by the use man pitch trim on the PFD. Both pop up as they should, both indicated properly. Both aircraft seem extra pitch sensitive, as that is correct, because when you're in direct law, you now have a direct correlation between side stick deflection and elevator movement. So it is, in real life, very twitchy and sensitive in direct law. Good to see both of those modeled there correctly. Now we're going to commence a direct law stall. There is no stability, there is no protection. Stall warning coming from the Toliss right there. FlightFactor completely stalled, no indications whatsoever. I'm trying to get into a deep stall there with the Toliss. You can see now we do the recovery, keep that AOA minimized, a little over aggressive pitch down there. I'm trying to just insinuate the importance of that VLS speed scale when you're trying to do a stall recovery. Now, these maneuvers are not intended to be PTS standard. If anything there, that was a very abrupt nose low, almost a negative G there on the Toliss recovery on my part. But again, I'm just showing you why you're supposed to have that VLS speed scale up there, because you bury that nose, get that AOA down until the aircraft has come out of VLS, and then you begin to pitch aft on the side stick to recover the flight path. All right, so I was trying to verify my settings for the FlightFactor there. That's why I opened up the screen, because it seemed almost uncontrollable with how pitch sensitive it was. Again, I'm running 0 curves just because I wanted to make sure each aircraft was exactly the same for the sake of this video. All right, I clean up the aircraft here, retract the landing gear, and for the 319, we'll recycle the flight control computer to get out of alternate law, and we'll get the aircraft both back in normal law. They both recover, and we're going to set up for an instrument landing system ILS approach to an auto land. We'll then see how each aircraft handle an auto land back into Seattle. Now, it's worth mentioning that when I did this flight test initially, in the very first video I made, that the FlightFactor was actually the clear winner in terms of subsystem modeling such as alternate law and direct law. But with the updates that have come since that video, their clear winner, in my opinion, is definitely the Toliss in terms of that speed scale, which is a crucial piece of information that needs to be there in alternate law, and with the aircraft handling. As the autopilot disconnected with the FlightFactor in normal law, we had some weird pitch moments. The Toliss actually simulated it much more realistically, and the feel of the flying itself in alternate law and direct law, I will give the check mark to Toliss in defeating the FlightFactor in the flight test portion of this video. Alright, so as we watch these aircraft kind of simultaneously get set up for the same approach into Seattle, let's recap what we've done so far. So in my opinion, on the ground, when we looked at the external modeling of the aircraft, I think that the fine details are definitely in FlightFactor's favor. You do get a little bit more attention to detail around some of the key components of the aircraft, such as the engines, the cabins, maybe the wing root area, and the empennage as well. Now, that is without cost, so when you look at performance, I think that the Toliss is pretty much undisputed in its ability to outperform the FlightFactor in any case when it comes to frames per second and running on your system. Now we look at the sounds. I think by default the FlightFactor sounds are actually a little bit better than the default Toliss sounds, but for me personally, I don't run any default sounds with either of these aircraft. I run the BSS sound pack with each. So the sounds, we'll just call it a draw. Now, as we took off and begun our flight test, I do find that the normal law handling of both aircraft are pretty well done. It is definitely modeled correctly in terms of the roll rate and G-load demand. However, the FlightFactor, with the default curvature and linear, no curves, and just a linear across the board with the TCA side stick, is extremely pitch sensitive from the get-go. So I don't really want to knock FlightFactor for that. I think that it's probably something you just have to tweak within your settings of X-Plane to get just a little bit less aggressive pitching moment in the FlightFactor, especially during that rotation mode. The rotation of the FlightFactor just feels off to me. It's overly aggressive in my opinion. As we conclude the normal portion of the flying, where I think both airplanes are pretty much equal, we go into the alternate part of our flight where we tested alternate law, we tested stall characteristics, protections, and stabilities. The Toliss in that aspect is the clear winner in my opinion. They have correctly simulated the speed scale in alternate and direct law. The aircraft handling is better in alternate and direct law, and of course you can actually ID when you are stalling in the Toliss, where the FlightFactor, it's almost nearly impossible unless you just know that you're stalled by looking at your speed and the aircraft's energy. So the alternate phase of flight is definite win in the Toliss column. Alright, so now we're set up here on the ILS 16 center, and we're going to be doing an auto land. We're going to see how both aircraft handle the auto land to 16 center here in Seattle. Alright, as we watch a beautiful gear extension here of both these aircraft, I wanted to point out just a few things. The FlightFactor main gear doors open way too fast as opposed to the real thing. And the Toliss, that's the tiniest of details, is if you watch that nose gear door close, they actually closed before the main landing gear doors. In real life, the aircraft landing gear doors will all commence closing at the same time once the down locks are extended. So you shouldn't see the nose doors close and then the main gear doors close. They should all close at the same time. Just the tiniest of details. We're splitting hairs, but I just thought I'd point that out as it's what we're supposed to do here on this video. Let's go ahead and continue to watch the approach. As we get a great shot of the wing views there, you could see that tiny little detail going to FlightFactor. They got the hoist points and just a little bit crisper textures on the wing itself. But again, both very well done. Alright, so as we watch the rest of this approach, they're identically synced up here as best I can. We'll take a look at our FMA, and I know the second autopilot is engaged on the FlightFactor 320. However, we're getting a Cat 3 single. I'm unsure why that is happening. I just noticed this here as we're looking at the footage, but this should indeed show Cat 3 dual. This is a Cat 3 dual runway. There is no limitation. So unless something is broke in the aircraft that I'm unaware of, it's hard for me to diagnose here in hindsight, not being in the airplane, but it should indeed say dual. I'm not exactly sure if that's an error or it's just this typical approach that I've got set up. So we'll go ahead and leave that for now. As we approach 750 feet here, you'll notice the landing inhibit comes on. They come on both aircraft. I know it's hard to see there on the FlightFactor because it's a little bit cut off, but they're both there and indicating properly. Next thing we're looking for here as we come down the approach is going to be the land green. We'll replace the glide slope and LOC on the FMA, indicating that all systems are go for an auto land.
500. 400.
There you can see it's being indicated properly.
300. 200.
Terrain.
That terrain call out is spurious. I get that in the Toliss. I don't know why it is incorrect. It should not be there.
50. 40. 30. 20. 10. Retard. 5.
You could see here the Toliss floated just a little bit longer than the FlightFactor, and I know you can't see the landing rate, but the landing rate in the FlightFactor was around 86 feet per minute. It was actually much smoother. According to the landing rate, I'm not sure how accurate those really are. Now, this is something crucial that I like to test here. When you steer off the runway, if you do not disengage the autopilot, it will automatically snap back to center as it is still tracking the localizer. You must disengage the autopilot prior to exiting after a Cat 3 auto land. The FlightFactor simulated that pretty well. The Toliss autopilot disconnected because I used the rudder pedal to turn off. I really should have used my binding for the tiller. But the fact remains the same, as it will continue to track the localizer until the autopilot is disconnected, which is correct on both accounts. Alright, as we take a look at the replay here, you could see that both aircraft track the centerline very well. The FlightFactor sets down relatively easily, and the Toliss has just a little bit of float, lands a little bit longer than the FlightFactor, but still well within the touchdown zone. And in my opinion, the FlightFactor looked a little bit more firm than it indicated, so I don't really trust those landing rates. Either way, it was a successful landing for both aircraft that both tracked the localizer and slope all the way to the runway. And you could see here while I was trying to test that localizer capture, see how wonky it gets if you don't disconnect the autopilot and you try to turn off the runway. Yeah, I've found that out one time. So you only do it once and then you remember never to do it again. Alright guys, so let's go ahead and wrap this video up. The FlightFactor versus Toliss. I'm going to go through a list of all the items we discussed with a few additional items, and we will tally up the winner and settle this debate once and for all. Let's start with visual appearance, just the general visual appearance of the aircraft, the outside and the interior. That one is going to go to FlightFactor. The EFB, or Electronic Flight Bag, which is very popular amongst recently released add-ons, is going to go to FlightFactor as it has a fully implemented EFB system. The sounds, I'm going to give them each a point because it is a draw. The default sounds for both aircraft will be a draw. MCDU, or the McDo depth, and the functionality of the systems within the McDo, that is now going to be in favor of Toliss, as it has a few additional pages that are functional, where the FlightFactor is still missing very basic pages such as RadNav and Fix Info. Let's talk about some flying characteristics now. Rotation and the landing feel of the aircraft. So again, rotating the aircraft and landing the aircraft. Which one, in my opinion, feels as close to the real thing? That, without a doubt, in my opinion, is going to be Toliss. As we get airborne, we talked about normal law, and we flew the aircraft in normal law. We checked the fly-by-wire modeling of both airplanes. I will give them each a point, as that is a draw. Stall protection in normal law. This one is going to get a point in the Toliss column, because as we were in normal law and we're trying to just simulate a basic stall protection of the autopilot disconnect, Toliss executed that flawlessly, while we started to have some weird pitch oscillation there in the FlightFactor aircraft. As we got through the stall series, we started to go into alternate law, flying characteristics, and direct law. Again, the PFD, the speed scale, is critically important in any time you're in a stalled situation or an alternate law situation. Toliss has that modeled perfectly. That is going to be a point in the Toliss column. After we did our maneuvers, we came back and we did an auto land. How can the aircraft auto land? They are both going to get a point, as they are both successful in their auto land capability. For additional approach capability, I didn't do it on video just because it would be a really long video, but they are both fully capable of RNAV approaches and visual approaches with RNAV overlays on VOR approaches or selected approaches. They are both extremely capable and handle it well. As we get to the end, the last thing I'm going to give here credit for is customizable options. The FlightFactor, like I said at the very beginning of this video, is a what you see is what you get type of airplane. It comes with CFM engines and no sharklets and no SATCOM antenna. That's what you get. You can modify the aircraft if you wish with the Matavia mod, and there's some additional mods out there, but again, those are visual only mods, and there are a lot of guys that are not going to want to mess with editing aircraft files. The Toliss comes with standard CFM56 engines, Iae V2500 engines, the ability to add sharklets or wingtip fences, the ability to use the Florence kit, which is something we didn't even talk about, or the aileron with ground spoiler option, the ability to add or remove a SATCOM antenna, also implemented on the options tab for Toliss. And again, a huge point of emphasis that is, I haven't said it yet, but the ability to switch between imperial units and metric units is toggleable via the Toliss ISCS menu. So it is without a doubt that the customizable options are well within Toliss's favor, and they will of course get the point for customizing and customizable options in this column. So there you have it, guys, the conclusion of the beatdown FlightFactor versus Toliss. FlightFactor definitely had the upper hand the very first time I did this video. It is now apparent that the Toliss aircraft has come off the ropes and put down a haymaker on the FlightFactor 320 and is the undisputed champion when discussing the two aircraft head to head. Not to mention customer support with the Toliss aircraft is going to be generations better than anything you are going to get with FlightFactor. So keep that in mind. Again, I do appreciate you guys watching these videos. I hope you enjoyed this one. I put a lot of time into it. Until next time, guys, I'm V1. Stay safe, stay healthy. See ya.